So we're going to look this morning at the story of David and Goliath, and that's probably many of you are familiar with that. But what I want to do this morning is I want to read the text, and I'll be reading from the ESV, and it's primarily comes from 2 Samuel. We're going to look back at 1 Samuel for a moment. Read the text because there may be some details in there that we've forgotten since third grade. I think we probably know the broad strokes of the story, but let's go back and we'll read it, and then from then we'll draw out some of the main points, and then see if we can't make some applications over the next 45 minutes. So if you will, let's start. I was reading this morning. There's a lot of hard names, so I'm going to have my water this morning. Look, if you will, to 1 Samuel 16. And we're going to get introduced to David starting in verse 1 in 1 Samuel 16. So the Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons." And Samuel said, "How can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me." And the Lord said, "Take a heifer with you, and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord, and invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do, and you shall anoint for me with whom I declare to you." Samuel did what the Lord commanded, and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the city came to meet him trembling, and said, "Do you come peaceably?" And he said, "Peaceably. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves, and come with me to the sacrifice." And he consecrated Jesse and his sons, and invited them to the sacrifice. So Samuel's going to start looking for another king to replace Saul, and the Lord has told him to go to Bethlehem and seek out Jesse, and it's going to be one of his sons. And so this is where we start seeing the sons parade through. And starting in verse 6, when they came, he looked at Eliab and thought, surely, and this is the oldest son, he looked at Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks onto his heart." And remember that remember that phrase and that little blurb in the next chapter here in a few minutes. Then Jesse called Abinadab and said to him, and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, "Neither has the Lord chosen this one." Then Jesse made Shema pass, and he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. And Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, and Samuel said to Jesse, "The Lord has not chosen these." Then Samuel said to Jesse, "Are all of your sons here?" And he said, "There remains yet the youngest, but behold, he is keeping the sheep." And Samuel said to Jesse, "Send and get him, for we will not sit down until he comes here." And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, and he had beautiful eyes, and he was handsome. And the Lord said, "Arise, anoint him, for this is he." Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David that day forward. And Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. And then there's a few more verses here where we see where Dave is introduced to Saul. It says, "Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord tormented him. And Saul's servant said to him, 'Behold, now a harmful spirit from God is tormenting you. Let our Lord now command your servants who are before you to seek out a man who is skillful in playing the lyre, and with whom when the harmful spirit from God is upon you, he will play it, and you will be well.' So Saul said to his servants, 'Provide for me a man who can play well, and bring him to me.' And one of the young men answered, 'Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a man of good presence, and the Lord is with him.' Therefore Saul sent messages to Jesse and said, 'Send me David your son, who is with the sheep.' And Jesse took a donkey laden with bread and then skin of wine and a young goat, and sent them by David his son to Saul. And David came to Saul and entered his service, and Saul loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, 'Let David remain in my service, for he has found favor in my sight.' And whenever the harmful spirit from God was upon Saul, David took the lyre and played it with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the harmful spirit departed from him." So we see that early on, David was chosen to be the next king, and we see where Saul had a troubling spirit. They didn't have iPods back there, so he had to call and have David come and play the lyre for him and help soothe his soul. So 1 Samuel is where we really get into the story of David and Goliath. Starting in verse 1, and again, still reading from the ESV, 1 Samuel 17. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Socoh, which belongs to Judah. Then encamped belong Socoh and Azekah and Ephes-dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in the line of battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of that coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had a bronze armor on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spearhead weighed 600 shekels of iron. And his shield bearer went before him, and he stood and shouted out to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me, and if he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." And when Saul and all of Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So let's pause there for just a moment. There's some stats here given about Goliath. He was 6 cubits and a span. Does anybody have any idea how big that is, how tall that is? 9'6". I saw 9'9", 9'2". So depending on which unit of measure and how they do it there, he was over 9 foot tall, maybe as tall as 9'9", 9'2", 9'6", 9'9". Pretty big guy. The armor that he wore, any idea how much that weighed? I saw between 125 and 150 pounds. So you've got this guy that's over 9 foot, probably 9.5, let's say 9.5 feet, just to call it on an average. And he's wearing 150 pounds of chainmail armor. His spearhead, somebody have any thought on that? 15, that's what I've got, is 15 pounds. So pretty good size spearhead as well. This isn't in there, but just to give you an idea, I saw a little study that said if you look at his height and the kind of what he was carrying and everything, that if you figure kind of maybe the body mass of a rugby player, right, of a solid rugby player, that he was close to 600 pounds. So you've got somebody that's 9.5 feet in front of you, weighs about 600 pounds, built pretty solid, probably not a pudgy guy, probably more like a solid built rugby player, is if you can imagine that. So then going back to verse 12. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite in Bethlehem in Judah named Jesse, who had 8 sons. In the days of Saul, the man was already old and advanced in years, and the 3 oldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to the battle. And the names of the 3 sons that went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, and next to him were Abinadab, and the third Shema. And David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand morning and evening. And Jesse said to David his son, "Take for your brothers an ephah of parched grain and the 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. And also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their thousands. See if your brothers are well, and bring them some token from me." Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. And David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with the keeper, and took the provisions and went, and as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. And David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage, and ran to the ranks, and went and greeted his brothers. And as he talked to them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines, and spoke the same words as before, and David heard him. So you've got the battle going on, and it's one of these, they're standing before each other and challenging each other. And Jesse's worried about his sons, wants to report, sends David down, loads him up with some gifts, and sends them to the encampment. And David shows up just as some of the action is going on, and he's bringing gifts. He's got food for his brothers. He's got some food for his commander, right? He's paying tribute to the commanding officer. And David gets to see these battles and everything that's going on. So starting in verse 24, all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel, and the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David said to the men who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in the same way. So shall it be done to the man who kills him. Now Eliab, his eldest brother, who's being a big brother at this point, now Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the man, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, why have you come down? And with whom have you left those sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil in your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And David said, what have I done now? Was it not but a word? And he turned away from him toward another and spoke in the same way, and the people answered him against as before. So you see a very common big brother attitude, right? Automatically assumes that David's just left the sheep and is being irresponsible. Where's the sheep? Well, don't you have a job? Already challenging him on, why are you saying these things, and who are you to say these things?
Brett, don't you think maybe there's an element of maybe hurt pride?
Yeah.
On the older brother's part? He and all these other grown men who are soldiers are shaking their boots.
Mm-hmm.
David's like, look, why isn't somebody taking the reproach from Israel?
Yeah, that's a great point. John?
The older brother seems a bit jealous to me.
Yeah.
And it seems like here we see a little resistance from the older brother for David of doing anything except taking care of sheep like he was supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
And then later we see a little resistance from the king because of David's youth.
Yep. And maybe we're reading into it just a little bit, but you see, David says, what have I done now, right? Like maybe he's used to this scrutiny and picking on from his older brother, right? We don't know what the age difference is here. I don't think we know what David's age is here. I couldn't see anything on that other than other than youthful. John?
I think I've read it speculated he was probably 18 or 19.
Yeah, I kind of picture him. I don't know I don't recall or know. Luke probably knows what the age of fighting it. Not sorry, put you on the spot. Luke, how old was that, David? I mean, it obviously wasn't fighting age and wasn't out there, but he was described as youth. So in my mind, he's kind of in that 15, 16, 17-year-old.
Yet old enough to take care of sheep.
Right.
And especially when he was playing music for Saul.
Right.
He was still taking care of sheep.
Right. So had old enough to have some responsibilities, but not old enough to be out on the front line.
Fighting age was 20.
What? Fighting age was 20? Thank you. Fighting age was 20, Luke. Luke's our Old Testament expert. So go into verse 31. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go against the Philistines to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came in a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by the beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord, who has delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. Then Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put his helmet of bronze on his head, and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor, and he tried in vain to go, but he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. So David put them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in his shepherd's pouch, and a sling in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. So I picture this as, when my girls were younger, they would go into their mom's closet and get her dress and her high heels and go walk out of the closet, right? And it's kind of that clunky, it's too big, can't move in it, can't maneuver in them, but it's even more so, right? This is a young boy wearing a man's armor, and it's just too big and bulky for him. He's not used to wearing it. So in verse 41, and the Philistines moved forward and came near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistines looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistines said to David, Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth. And all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with a sword and spear. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. So let's stop there for a moment. What's the attitude of Goliath? Kind of what's the Goliath goes through a few things here, right? As he sees David walk out, and wearing no armor with just a sling. What's his first thought? John?
Well, he was trash talking. We would call it today.
Trash talking, right? I think at first he was just offended. I don't think he took this as a serious, and he was just offended that they would. What are you doing? You're a kid. What are you doing out here against me, right? And then, as he started to speak, then, all that kind of way, Goliath's attitude was, I'm about to teach you a lesson, kid, right? I'm about to teach you. You've stepped out, you've overkicked, you're past your protection. I'm about to teach you a lesson. And what's David's reaction? I heard someone say, yeah, right? Yeah, right. David's not scared. David stands up and I don't even consider it trash talking. Trash talking a little bit. There's a little bit of a sense of humor sometimes in trash talk. This was more of David's going to tell him how it is. I'm about to slay you, cut off your head, and show everybody here who the true God is.
There's some cursing that goes on,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which would be typical, which
Right.
would be absolutely par for the course. By my God, I will do this to you.
Mm-hmm.
Show of strength on Goliath's part, which is probably legitimate. He's got everybody shaking in their boots. And David doesn't say, by my gods, I'll do that. He doesn't, like you're saying, he doesn't really return in like kind. He says, well, this is what's going to happen, and I don't really even have anything to do with it. Yahweh is going to do this.
Right. David immediately gives God the glory, even before the end of the battle. And that's how confident he is, right? He doesn't say, if I strike you down, it was God's will. He's confident walking into it. John?
It says in the name of the Lord. In other words, by the authority of the Lord.
Yeah.
This is what's going to happen.
Yep.
And of course, it is the Lord.
Yep. Anybody else? John or Jeff? Sorry.
In verse 47, he said that all this assembly may know. Not certain there, but I get the impression that that assembly is both the Israelites and the Philistines. So not only will our enemies know, but our own people will recognize what they have failed to recognize at this point.
I 100% agree with that. I think this is not just a message he's about to deliver to the Philistines. He's about to set an example for the army as well. Luke?
As far as cycles and repeating history, David represents an ideal Israel at this point,
Mm-hmm.
and he's very much a Caleb figure. Going back to the 10 spies, he's representing the ideal submissive form of Israel, who's confident in their God, who gives him the credit, but is willing to do the action necessary.
Right. That's a great point. Steve?
Faith in action could be seen as courage, but the earth and men see it as stupidity.
Right.
And in this case, David is inside of him has the faith of a giant.
That's a good point. He's got the faith of a giant. Scott? Or first Scott, not the back Scott, the front Scott.
1 Samuel 13:19. Now no blacksmith could be found in all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, otherwise the Hebrews will make swords or spears. So all Israel went down to the Philistines, each to sharpen his plowshare and his mattock and his axe and his hoe. And they charged a high expense for those sharpenings.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so your Israelites, in the time of Saul and Jonathan, were oppressed by these Philistines, and weapons were very few. And this was just before Jonathan took one of the only swords, and the other, belonged to Saul, went up and fought a battle by himself, had a victory, and said, the Lord's on our side. So this, in the lifetime of Saul and Jonathan, and then this battle happens, I assume that they still don't have many weapons in Israel, and when they're stepping out to fight, they're bringing with them their sharpened plowshares and their equipment from farming and what they have to protect themselves, sticks.
Yeah.
So you can imagine, without that faith and without someone being a little more well-trained, you're looking at fighting people who have weapons, who are on the other side of the valley, and then you've got this champion who's a fighting machine that you're not going to be able to take out easily. So my thought is okay, not only do they not have the weapons, they've got this champion with a weapon who's well trained. So
Right.
I can see where that could have an effect on faith.
Yeah, that's great background. So, Scott McAfee, you had a comment as well?
I think David had a real clear vision of the realities that the other people didn't have. The other people saw what they saw with their eyes. David saw what he knew of God.
That's a great point. So David saw with his heart, and everybody else was looking with his eyes. Mary?
Along what Scott said, and I love the humility of David. When you look at verse 47, he says, "For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." Recognizing that it was the Lord, and it wasn't, and he will give you into my hand. He will give you into our hand.
Right.
That the focus is on God and what he's doing.
Yep. Any more? Steve?
I was thinking about what the front Scott said, and Goliath had the modern weapons at the time, but what David had might be perceived as primitive, but I've seen like YouTubes of guys using slings, and first I was impressed with their accuracy, and then also impressed with how effective the weapon was. It was, in a sense, like having a high-powered rifle. If you have somebody that's skillful, yeah, they can take out a bear, they can take out Goliath.
Yep. John?
Kind of going along with what Scott and what Steve just said, they did have slingers in the army. They had whole units that were slingers, and most of those were from the tribe of Benjamin. And it says back in, let's see, Judges chapter 20, around 15, verse 16, someplace there, it talks about where they were so accurate slinging those stones that they could hit human hair a ways off and hit straight on, the width of it. So they were very accurate, and no doubt David was pretty trained, especially since he used it against wild animals.
Right.
It sounds like.
Yeah. All right, let's read the climax here. So starting in verse 48. When the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. And there was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of his sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah arose with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way from Sharim as far as Gath and Ekron. And the people of Israel came back from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their camp. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, and he put his armor in his tent. And as soon as Saul saw David go out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, As your soul lives, O king, I do not know. And the king said, Inquire whose son the boy is. And as soon as David returned from the striking down of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, Whose son are you, young man? And David answered, I am the son of your servant, Jesse the Bethlehemite. So there's a question there about why Saul doesn't recognize David at this point or know who he is. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe they were written at different times, and you've got some different, a couple of different variations there. But regardless, it's the story. The story remains. What are some of your? There's been a lot of commentary, which tells me that a lot of people feel the same way about the story as I do. What's the significance of, if any, of David grabbing 5 stones? John?
I've heard it preached before that some believe that Goliath had brothers,
Okay,
so he took them along in case one of the other brothers stepped forward.
could be.
It's just gonna be speculation, right?
Yeah.
He would keep firing stones until he didn't have any stones.
Yeah, and so it's pure speculation, right? It doesn't say. But I think it shows that David obviously had faith and confidence to go out there and face Goliath. But at the same time, he knew that it was going to be a battle, and it might take, as far as David knew, it might take more than 1 stone. He didn't know. He knew he was going to win. He had faith and confidence that he was going to be victorious, but he wasn't sure how long of a battle or what was going to be needed. So he came prepared, or as prepared as he could. So at least that's my takeaway from. Anybody else have a thought on that? John?
It would mess up the kids' song.
Exactly. That's what he was thinking about, was the kids' song. It was the. What about the timing, right? So if you think about how did David's past experience, we touched on this, but how did David's past experience help prepare him for this battle? Stephen?
That's what I liked about the section before verse 41, where David drew on what God had done in his life already.
Right.
And that encouraged his trust in how God had delivered these animals to him. Well, God's going to deliver this human animal to him as well.
Right. David had seen God working in his life before. David had seen where God had given him strength and had faith in God's guidance over him. So, drawing on that, he knew it could be done, and had used that experience there. Anybody else?
And I would say it would have taken faith for David to chase down a bear, to chase down these other things.
Yeah.
So, but that wasn't a killer in front of the entire armies of 2 civilizations here.
Right.
Those were sort of challenges that helped him grow his faith up until this
Right.
monumental task.
But all 3 could have been just as deadly, right? A bear, a lion, and a giant. They're all. Once you're dead, you're dead. So all 3 of them could have killed him. But you're right. He'd been delivered before, and knew what God had done for him. I saw somebody. Mary.
That's one of the things that I enjoy
We've talked a lot about we've already talked kind of throughout about the overcoming the fear and the doubt that David probably faced and what that looked like. Got a note here about the power of small things, right? David chose a sling and a stone, and it was one little small stone that hit Goliath in a vulnerable spot. And sometimes it's those small decisions, sometimes it's those small things, right? It's the choice not to go. It's the choice to stand up. It's the choice to speak up, right? Sometimes it's that small thing that helps us defeat that giant that's in front of us. Any thoughts on that? Or all right. Look, if you will, also to 2 Samuel chapter 21. Does anybody know how many giants were killed in the Bible? I count 5. Goliath. And then starting in 2 Samuel verse 15, there was war again between the Philistines and Israel. And David went down together with his servants, and they fought against the Philistines. And David grew weary. And Ishbenob, one of the descendants of the giants, whose spear weighed 300 shekels of bronze, and who was armed with a new sword, thought to kill David. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, came to his aid and attacked the Philistines and killed him. Then David's men swore to him, "You shall no longer go out with us to battle, lest you quench the lamp of Israel." In verse 18, after this there was war again with the Philistines of Gob. Then Sibbecai the Hushathite struck down Saph, who was one of the descendants of the giants. And then there was again war with the Philistines at Gob, and Elihan, the son of Jarorgam, the Bethlehemite, struck down Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. And there was again war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number, and he was also descended from giants. And when he taunted Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimmel, David's brother, struck him down. These 4 were descended from the giants of Gath, and they fell by the hand of David, by the hand of his servants. So what's the difference between, David's an older man at this point. David, as a youth, struck down a giant with a single stone, and then many, many years later, was nearly killed by a giant, and someone had to come to his aid. What's the lessons we can draw from that? Not to become weary to keep fighting. Absolutely. I see that, our faith can waver over time, right? As a young man, David was confident and, had no hesitation about going out and fighting. Clearly, he's out fighting the giant, fighting this time, right? So he was still out there fighting, but for some reason, he didn't have the same resolve, or the same, maybe he had the same resolve. I don't know that, but he didn't have the same results this time, right? He grew weary, and he needed the help of somebody else. So sometimes we need the help of a brother. Sometimes we're fighting, and we're at a point where we can't do it on our own, and we need the help. And so that's where you look around and see, if you see someone fighting a giant and growing weary, you can step in and help them. Scott McAfee? Not the size of the dog in the fight, the size of the fight in the dog is what Scott said. I see 2. Go ahead.
Something I think about is similar to this. There's a lot of battles that are fought in these surrounding books of the Bible. And in a couple of them, the Israelites come out 100% victorious. But in most of them, it seems even the battles they're told to go win, their people die too. And that always seems so unfair to me. Well, God told us to go fight, and then all these families lost people from them. And in this case, I see this as a similar, where maybe David had a waver of faith or something, but also he's in a battle, he's exhausted, and just because he beat a giant once, at some point he's going to die, and at some point things can just go wrong, because that's how life is. So accepting those times as not always directly guided, perhaps, or things happen. It's life.
Right. Sometimes it is possible for the Giants to win sometimes, I think is what you're saying, yeah. Mark?
Kind of along a similar thought pattern, or at least something that I think can build well with that. God's purpose for me today is not necessarily God's purpose for me tomorrow. God intended for Goliath of Gath to be taken down and to show his might and show his will, and his tool for that on that day was David.
Mm-hmm.
And his tool for that later on was not. And just because I was able to fight this battle today or complete this task today does not necessarily mean that I'm expected to keep on beating that battle for a lifetime.
Right.
There are other things that I need to move on to. And I think there's several potential applications that maybe fall in there, but we gotta be careful to make sure that we don't fall into a trap of defining ourselves by a single moment, whether we give God the glory for that moment or not. Because if we are only sticking ourselves to that one moment, then we're not living the life that God has placed us to live.
Right. And you see that kind of reflected in this last sentence in verse 17, where David's men told him, "You shall no longer go out with us to battle, lest you quench the lamp of Israel," right? At that point, his men recognized, David, you're more valuable as a symbol, as someone to look up to, as a lamp of Israel, than you are actually fighting the battles. Let us do that for you. John?
This whole chapter makes me think that, it just shows that David had such great faith, such great courage, and just, he had such a commitment to God. And it shows forth that, and even allowing God to use him, stepping out in faith, that he could stand up to this giant,
Mm-hmm.
this heavily armed giant, a trained giant from his youth, where David was not.
Right. Well, and you look at these next four the next ones that were killed, starting in verse 18, and it goes in pretty quick succession. There was a war, and this person killed this giant. There was another war, and this person killed that giant. Without it saying it directly, I believe that these men all knew the story of David killing the giant, right? And they knew it could be done. They'd seen it done in the past. And so, two things to keep in mind, right? One, as you're fighting your own giants, whatever that may be, as you're fighting your own giants, remember there's other people that are going to see you, and they may not say anything. They may not, but they'll take note, right? Or the stories will be told, and that can be an encouragement. When people see you fighting your giants, whatever they are, and gracefully doing that with God's help, that lends courage and motivation and faith to others because they see someone else doing it and fighting it, right? The other side of that is when you're fighting a giant or you're facing your own giant, you can look around to others, and you can look to others who have also fought giants, and you can look back and see what others have done and draw strength from that as well. Linda.
Yeah, I think it's most curious how the servants were able to kill the giant. And I think it's because David killed the first one.
Right.
And it reminds me of the 4-minute mile. Nobody could run faster than 4 minutes. Then Roger Bannister broke the barrier, and then other people were able to run that one.
Yep.
Because now they believe they can do it.
Yep, you see that over and over in sports. Sports is a great analogy for that. The 4-minute mile. There's the marathon. There's a few others that once somebody crosses that invisible or that impossible barrier, suddenly lots of other people can cross that barrier. They see that it can be done. Matt?
With David on the battlefield, here's a proven warrior, proven leader in David, and yet he needs help.
Right.
Galatians 6:2, we're supposed to bear one another's burdens, and the leaders aren't excluded from that. I think there's a vision of leadership that goes something like this. The leader is perfect, and you always follow the leader. And that's not humanly possible,
Right.
and it's not God's model. And I think God is showing us here, no, the leaders need help too. We are to bear one another's burdens. And really what at the end of the day, we see God's power.
Yep.
God is the one who enabled Abishai to kill that giant that came after David. He's the one who enabled David. And so each one in his own moment, that shows really God's the one working through all of this.
Yep. I appreciate all the discussion. Lots of good takeaways. There is we could probably spend an entire 2 or 3 more classes just talking about this and still not get everything. So I appreciate the participation and the comments this morning. Thank you.